All right, Pat. Okay. Welcome, everyone. We're now ready to convene the meeting and welcome members to the June meeting. Welcome, everybody being here for the joint meeting. Pat, will you call the roll, please?
Yes. City of Avondale, Charlene Panella. City of Buckeye, Dan Cotterman. City of Buckeye, Dan Cotterman. Okay. City of Chandler, Ryan Peters.
Here.
City of El Mirage, Autumn Grooms. Town of Fountain Hills, Dave Trimble.
Here.
Town of Gilbert, Rob Bohr.
Here.
City of Glendale, Kevin Phelps or Kevin Link. City of Goodyear, Julie Cairns. Maricopa County, Cameron Dowling or Jacqueline Edwards. City of Mesa, Chris Brady.
Here.
City of Peoria, Eric Strunk.
Here.
City of Phoenix, Jesus Sapien.
Here.
Town of Queen Creek, Bruce Gardner.
Here.
City of Scottsdale, Mark Melanchenko. I just saw him join. City of Surprise, Tracy Montgomery. City of Tempe, Eric Iverson.
Here.
And ADOT, Shatwan Reed.
That what? May I ask? I see Kevin's name up there. You want to try that one more time?
Kevin Link, City of Glendale.
Here.
Kevin Phelps.
There. Okay, they got it. Okay.
Great. Thank you. We're set.
Okay, thank you. If a committee member would like to ask a question or make a comment during the meeting, please type your comment in the box and it will be read aloud and answered. All meeting attendees, please mute your computer, microphone, or phone. All right, item 1, public comment. The public will be provided with an opportunity at this time to address the committees on non-agenda items and all agenda items. Up to 3 minutes will be provided per speaker, unless the chair allows more at his discretion. A total of 15 minutes for all speakers will be provided. Do we have any public?
Mr. Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley.
The rail that you're not doing it multimodal. And if you are doing it multimodal, the stops have to be as convenient and close as possible. And I look at the one on Jefferson at 12th Street. There are no 12th Street buses, so it's not connecting. But it is 3/8 of a mile away from 15th. And I gave you a chart right there. Today, the average high is 100. Next week, it's going to be 101. Then the week after that, 102, all the way to mid-July when it's going to be 107. I've tried to communicate with our new executive director to show her that if you've got people walking even an eighth of a mile in this heat, it becomes injurious to your health. And what I've passed out there is the July weather chart from this morning's paper, which shows all the record highs and comparable lows. But then you'll note that there are almost a third that have occurred in 16, 17, and in 20. So that within the last 5 years that we have had that amount of extra highs. You'll also note on there that there's 122 and 120 and a couple of 19s. This is the reality for your customers. So, as I said, since this is the blended committee and you're doing whatever it is you're going to be doing, have a little sense. Then I'd like to go to item 3G. Your federal legislative counseling services, you know, the thing that got you in trouble just recently. Well, realize that whatever monies you're going to be spending on there, you're going to have to use the Prop 400 money before it's convoluted with the federal monies. Because you can't spend any monies that are federal on this. And when you convolute your monies, they all become federal. So a little heads up there about what you need and have to be doing. And then back to this being a blended committee. You guys passed a document that said, yes, we're going to spend $30 million on planning, and et cetera, with these 3 companies, but we're also going to be spending a little bit of that for the bus. Well, I was supposed to have some documents. The executive director had instructed them to get to me, and I still don't have them, that would have compared and shown what has happened with the 212,000 out of a $9 million contract for the bus when it went to the planning there, because I don't see where it was done well. And at 212,000, did you get what you paid for? Because these people are planning rail, they aren't planning intermodal.
All right, we'll move to item 2, Executive Office Report. Jessica, I see you up in the upper right-hand corner. Are you doing
Yes.
the report today?
I am. Good morning, Chair Brady. Good morning, council members. I am joining you virtually today as I am en route to our new home in Arizona with my family, and we can't wait to be back and
Congratulations.
officially. Thank you. Thank you.
Even
So
if it
thank
is
you.
Gilbert, congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad my family wasn't within earshot to hear Mr. Crowley's weather report. We're very aware of the temperature and the trending higher temperatures. And this is something that we're going to have to take up when we think about passenger amenities. So I've got a few things to update you on this morning. First, a great celebration happened on Friday, May 20th, when we opened the Tempe streetcar. We celebrated along with citizens, businesses, and elected officials from the city of Tempe and throughout the region, including a Federal Transit Administrator from Region 9, Ray Tellis. We had a wonderful event at Marina Heights. Then we took the inaugural ride on the Tempe streetcar and soon after welcomed our customers aboard. We invite the public and all members of this committee, of course, to hop on board the Tempe streetcar. It is free for the first year. You know, I want to note that this project is made possible by the excellent work between Valley Metro, our partners in Tempe, including a public-private partnership that helped this project cross the finish line. Our operations and maintenance teams and our planning, design, construction, and communications teams have done a wonderful job. You know, Valley Metro has become known by the Federal Transit Administration as an excellent example of project delivery. And what that means for us here in Phoenix and for the people we serve is that our ability to attract that federal funding helps us achieve a bold capital vision for transit across the valley. And it also helps those local and regional transit funding dollars go much further. So I congratulate the team on a job well done on this project and look forward to continued success on other projects coming. Also last month, May was a busy month in the community. We celebrated the winner of our high school Design a Transit Wrap contest. Jocelyn Hernandez from Mountain View High School in Mesa won this contest. This is actually our 22nd year of Design a Transit Wrap. It's very exciting. Her artwork, which is featured here, is called Greet the Day, the Valley Metro Way. Her graphic design will be featured on a bus and a light rail train for the next year. I have been delighted to see that light rail train with Jocelyn's artwork in passenger service, and it just looks great. Finally, small business assistance. I want to give you an update on this program. We're now in our second year, but in our pilot year in 2021, Valley Metro, working together with our partners in the city of Phoenix, engaged 62 small businesses along those construction corridors and awarded $376,000. The intention of this program is to help offset some of the negative impacts that construction has on these local businesses. The program has been renewed for the life of these construction projects on both South Central and Downtown Hub and Northwest Extension Phase 2. In year 2 of the project, which just started back on April 19th, we have already awarded local businesses more than $80,000, and we currently have more than 30 applications in the pipeline, and we're working now with more businesses to get them within that pipeline. So I am grateful to our team members, the City of Phoenix City Council, for championing this project, and actually pictured here is Councilmember Ansari with the owners of Corral Cleaners. City Council is conducting significant small business engagement to help our local businesses. It is for them and the community, of course, that we build these projects. I am very proud to introduce the Quality of Life study website. The URL is on the bottom of the slide, valleymetro.live. This site has been launched, and we're launching it in a virtual format rather than a print format. It comes after months of data gathering, analyzing, design, and it's been a big effort from planning, communications, IT, and marketing staff at Valley Metro. I encourage you all, if you have time after this meeting, to check it out. It is a fantastic resource. The intention of this site is to inform how public transit intersects with our daily lives across the valley and the value that public transit brings to our communities. All of the information is centered around 4 pillars. They are responding to the valley's needs, improving communities through transit, prioritizing riders, and benefiting the valley. The expected outcomes of this site is to increase understanding of how transit investments are critical to the community and how critical continued investment is to our future. This site's launch is particularly timely because we are facing the renewal of key transportation funding in the region as early as this fall. The data comes from several different sources, including regional, state, and federal agencies like the Maricopa Association of Governments and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So check out this site. And finally, looking ahead, June, we've got an AFS meeting coming up tomorrow at 12 p.m. And our board of directors meeting on June 16th is going to have a very active agenda. We are working most notably to bring our FY23 budget process to a close. And I know the budget process and the budget itself has been the topic of intensive discussion in recent months. I feel optimistic as we go to AFS tomorrow and then to our full board on June 16th. In July, there will be a board recess. And then when we reconvene in August, I look forward to scheduling study sessions in response to some of the board topics raised, most notably through AFS. Some of those topics are going to include strategic planning, and this is the process by which we together, Valley Metro, our member cities and community and board, would lay the framework for our strategic goals for the years ahead. That would be the foundation for our budget, our operating and capital budgets for FY24 and beyond. We're also going to be discussing in a separate conversation how we can resource our operations and maintenance contracts. And we've got a couple of other study sessions to schedule as well. So we will have an active fall beginning in August. And finally, Chair Brady, before I turn it back to you, I want to thank you for your service as chair of the TMC and RMCs for the past year. We appreciate the time that you have invested, and I value your guidance and levity. In the short time we have worked together, I have come to respect you and your leadership very much as part of this organization. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Jessica. Great report. All right. We're now ready. Wow, you guys are getting fancy here. Okay. I don't even have to look at my notes anymore. All right, so we're ready for item number 3, the consent agenda. We have several items there for the consent for action. Are there any committee members who have any questions or items that need to be pulled for separate discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have any specific item that I want to, I'm fine with the consent agenda, but this is more for Jessica coming in. We're approving in items C, D, and E, and then we have an issue in I that around IT. And I think if I were a new CEO coming in, I don't know what the right answer is, but we're approving about 5.6 million in outside IT services. We also have obviously in-house IT that we have. I would just encourage you to look at the balance. Obviously, some of these things are perfunctory license agreements, which we have no control over. But I would, just encourage you to look at how we build an IT approach using both in-house talent versus outside consultants. We're going back on a time card issue. We have a consultant that's helped us through an ERP implementation. We wanted to go away from a time clock, and we found out that what they provided for us doesn't have the speed and access that makes it practical. So now we're going back to a time card system, which was one of the goals of getting away from. And there was an example of an IT consultant that don't know all the particulars on it, but at least from a surface level appears to maybe not delivered as much as we needed as an agency. So just more for you, Jessica, kind of going forward, I think here in the coming months, I would just encourage you to look at the balance of how often we rely on outside IT services versus what talent and skill set we should develop internally. And that's my only comment, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Kevin.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just a note that I've just read this here. Note the consent item 3I. Yes. The total amount is for $612,196. Is that correct? Additional funding is requested for inclusion for an employee time clock system, and it's included in the memo. So just want to make sure there wasn't any confusion based on the way that item is agendized. Okay. I don't know if that changes your calculation on your total amount, but. All right. So we have the consent agenda. So I request a motion for approval. Do I have a motion? A motion by Kevin. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second by Ryan. All right. So remind me, Pat, what are we doing now? Okay. So we're going to do all calls. So if you are online, please unmute. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Very good. Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move to agenda item number 4. This is the fiscal year 2023 Valley Metro RPTA and Valley Metro Rail proposed operating and capital budgets. Jessica, would you like to introduce this item?
Good morning. So this is the final review of this item by this particular committee. And then again, it will go to AFS tomorrow and to our full board on May 16th. We have been working in recent months to be very responsive to our member cities. We have answered dozens, if not scores of questions, I believe. And Jim Hilliard and Tyler have been doing such a great job of responding to those questions and then getting that back out to the full membership. So trying to increase that transparency. Moving forward, in addition to transparency, we will also be increasing engagement in the budget development process so that you're seeing these items much earlier on and you're aware of and engaged within and have informed the strategic direction of the organization. And that actually gets back to the comments made earlier about IT and how we're approaching IT. I would rather engage this committee and our board in conversations about how we do business before we actually move through the budget process. So I hope you've seen this little bit of a shift in direction. And again, my hats go off to Jim Hilliard and Tyler Olson, who with their teams, they're just doing a great job and working to crank out responses and make the budget as transparent as possible. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim for presentation at this time.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. So there's 2 things that my presentation will attempt to share with you this morning. The first is in response to the suggestion at our last meeting. Mr. Brady, you essentially wrapped up the discussion with a, yes, thank you for boring us to death with all this detail, but let's not lose sight of the bigger picture. And we thought that was
said a lot more.
well,
that's probably a good summary.
but that was the gist of it, right? And we thought that was a really good point. And so in our presentation to the board 2 weeks post, we started out with an overview of the feedback that we've received, the new information that we've gathered that we believe made changes in our initial proposal to the board on the budget appropriate. And so there were 9 items that we overviewed with the board that reduced our total request by $2.8 million for the 2 agencies combined. So we went over those and then illustrated how they impacted the big picture of the budget overall, both in terms of what we were asking for by category, and then most importantly, what we were asking for in total and how those requests impacted city funding. And so we want to share that material with you today because the board's feedback to us on that was good. Please incorporate these. So that forms the basis of the budget that we're presenting for adoption in the June cycle. So we wanted to go over those in detail with you because while the board saw those in May, you haven't yet. The second thing we want to do, and we'll do this kind of a piece, is then illustrate how that revised budget connects to the documents that are being presented for adoption in the June cycle. And so as you've been seeing as we've gone along, and as you'll see in today's presentation, we've used a format that tried to create the greatest transparency for the board in how do you get from the 22 budget to the 23 budget, what's changing, in what categories, and then how does that impact the cities? So we thought that was a really useful view for the board in terms of understanding what we were doing and making decisions on what was changing. It doesn't happen to align with our accounting system, right? That's not how we manage on a day-to-day basis. We manage in a more, we have divisions and those divisions have line items. And so what comes to the board for adoption in the memo, and you see that in your packet, is a more traditional divisions and line items budget. And so what I'll do in the second part of my presentation today is connect the dots for what the board has seen in our more issue-centric executive summary to what's in the packet, so the board has clarity that what we've talked about all along is exactly what they're being presented with for approval. So those are the two things that I'll try to accomplish in today's presentation, and I'm going to kind of blend them together as we go by agency, as you'll see. Let's see. Okay, very quickly. So as I mentioned, in a moment here, I'll share with you the revisions that we're incorporating to further reduce the budget that's being presented for implementation. I think the only really issue that's really remains outstanding from a board decision-making perspective is the issue of the operating contingency, which, as you recall, was our way of giving the board some flexibility in the months to come to make any revisions to contracts like our bus operations contracts, our security contracts, to account for the rapid changes that we've seen in the labor environment in recent months. Those contracts were all bid years ago, and they simply didn't anticipate the kind of wage rate changes that we're now seeing. And as a result, we've got huge levels of vacancy that are causing us to miss service, et cetera. So as you know, we've been trying to walk a careful balance with, on the one hand, we have to sort of stub out the funding in the budget in order to give the board flexibility to make those changes if and when the board decides to do so. And again, the board will have to approve those changes before they're made. And on the other hand, not being so transparent in these discussions that we're kind of tipping our hands to vendors and sort of painting ourselves into a corner from a negotiating perspective. Therefore, one of the things that has been requested and that we'll be doing in June is conducting an executive session with the board to sort of lay out, okay, here's all the positions that we think, have significant vacancy due to wage change issues. Here's the range that we think is reasonable to be negotiating in, high enough that we think it fixes the problem, but as conservative as possible. We want to lay those out in an executive session to the board in June, so the board has some sense of where we think the range we think those negotiations will fall into, and then the board can give us feedback. Yes, we think that's reasonable, go forward, or no, we think you're too high for LRV cleaners and you should be targeting, this range. And so that will give us direction that we can then use in initiating those negotiations with those vendors. The result of those negotiations will come back to the board for approval before anything is implemented. And in fact, you'll see in the budget memo itself, we highlight an explicit requirement in the motion for the budget that any use of the contingency funding has to be explicitly approved by the board before it can be implemented, right? So this is the first step in that negotiating process, but we want to be able to do it behind closed doors. So the board has complete transparency, but we're not sort of tipping our hand to the agencies. Mr. Brady, I think I see a question.
Yeah, so I'm a little confused. So I guess when I think about engaging a third party to provide some kind of service for the city or for an agency, I'm assuming that's all a competitive process.
It is.
But why are we then having specific conversations about what they decide, how they decide to pay their employees? And I would say is, this is a trap, right? Because you start talking about wages, then you don't talk about benefits, then you don't talk about, I guess I'm confused by why are we not negotiating a contract for services that they submit to us with, which they've already included the level of service. Maybe they pay one group more than another, but isn't the outcome, the leading indicator isn't how much they pay their people, it's how competitive it is and with the services they provide. That's what I'm confused about.
Certainly. So I think the issue that we're struggling with here is, and I'll use the cleaning contract as an example. So we did a competitive RFP for our contract that conducts cleaning of the LRVs at night and cleaning of the stations during the day and at night. I think it was 4 years ago. And so of course, 4 years ago, the wage rate for folks doing those cleanings was quite different than it is today. We've seen the cost of hiring people to do those cleanings jump quite considerably, but the contract is what the contract is, and so that contractor right
So you're
now,
locked into an existing contract.
precisely.
And essentially, the contractor is to the point where they could walk the contract because they can't, the amount that they bid for doesn't work in today's environment.
Precisely. So we've got right now for the folks that are doing cleaning of stations and cleaning of LRVs, they can't fill 67% of the shifts. It's simply
So the
untenable.
question is either do you go and negotiate specifically, and I guess that's the question, can you do that inside an existing contract that you've executed? Because I'm really starting to get wondering how this fits into an executive session. I don't know what legal counsel is telling you, but this seems kind of odd to me.
So yes, thank you for that. So the counsel that we've received is what we're talking about here is the terms for a contract negotiation, and therefore it's appropriate for an executive session. The board is giving us parameters to negotiate within.
But you're only negotiating with one contractor.
That's correct. The existing contract holder. So one of the things we've also done is kind of loop back to FTA, and they've made clear recently that they understand these are dynamic times and that there isn't an issue with making adjustments either for wage rate inflation or inflation for other issues, provided that it complies with FTA guidelines, and we believe it does.
Again, why wouldn't you go back to the contractor and say, okay, give us a proposal for reset the amount from this point to I don't know what the term of the contract is. If we go back and look at what we think the numbers might be relative to a peer review, we'll either accept it or we won't. But I mean, I can't, it seems kind of odd to me that you're going to, well, maybe the board doesn't think this way. My counsel, I wouldn't go to them and say, okay, I have a part-time, let's pay them a range of $25 to $30, and we're going to go to this. I mean, we would just say, here's the contract for services. It's going to either go up by 30% or what, or we're going to choose to term the contract and restart it again.
In practice, I
Because
think
these are
that's
not your employees,
absolutely.
right? And you don't control benefits, you don't control.
Absolutely. And in practice, that's exactly what will happen, because it's not our intent to, for example, with our East Valley bus contract, to get in between the bus operator and the union and their collective bargaining agreement. That's not our business, and we need to stay at arm's length from that. On the flip side, we do need to give the board some estimate of how we think this might impact costs going forward. And because it's our intent really only to address the labor issue in this, we don't want a contractor coming back in a non-competitive environment and trying to up their profit margin. We've used the wages as the way that we're estimating how that might impact the contract. But you're absolutely right. What they'll give back to us is
What's the
total
remaining
cost.
term on this contract?
So it varies by the contracts. So for the cleaning contract, I think that we have a couple of one-year extensions left to go, and we don't have in process an RFP to replace it. In the case of the East Valley contract, I think our intent was that contract will term in the next year, and I think it was our intent to actually extend it a little bit so that we could sync up with some potential changes Tempe's considering. If we had a contract that was coming up quite soon, we would just let the competitive process handle it. But in the meantime, on the bus contract, for example, we're missing 10% of service right now. And so we don't think we can just live with that for the next year, especially at a time when we're asking the public to consider its contribution to public transit. So we think we have to address these, but we want to do it in the most conservative way possible. And then, of course, look forward to when we're able to rebid them in the new environment.
Okay, so you go back, that's fine. Just seems kind of a different approach. I would say this on the bus maintenance contract that's coming, that's part of the contingency we're holding on to, right?
It is.
I think because there is a lot of conversation going on around that, I think the earlier, I would say even in August, I think we need to have a conversation, a frank conversation of all members about what their perspective is of bus maintenance into the future. Because it will have a material impact on all of us if we decide to vary from what we're doing today. And I'm very concerned about it because I think as a region, we have to be a region. But if we're not going to be a region, then we need to understand what the impacts are. So can we make sure, Jessica, someone, at least I want to understand what the timing is for procuring that contract and what the assumptions that are built into that going forward, besides these wage issues.
Makes sense. Yep,
Okay, thanks.
certainly. Okay, so then let me move into the meat of the presentation today.
Excuse me, Jim.
One second.
Jesus had a question
Oh.
on one of the items on the slide.
Certainly.
Thank you, Pat.
Go
I
ahead.
can wait till the end if that's okay.
No, whatever, Jesus, go ahead. You're on here. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I also, on Phoenix's behalf, wanted to express the same concern that was just made. I've been here for a couple decades, and my recollection is we have not done an operations contingency like this before. I fully recognize we are in unprecedented times, and the labor market is something we have not seen before. But it is definitely concerning for us that there is $7 million being proposed when there may be other avenues such as salary savings, missed service, or a mid-year budget adjustment that we may be able to take at the right time instead of putting aside this amount of money now. Phoenix has also had a conversation with Valley Metro's leadership that if there is to be a executive session discussion about potentially doing something like this, especially with contractors and their employees that have collective bargaining in place, that some legal counsel be brought in that is proficient in basically transit labor law, because Jim's right in what he spoke earlier, that there is collective bargaining in place that covers not only wages, but also benefits and other work rules, which frankly affect how much a contractor can pay their employees. It's not just wages, it's benefits, work rules, time off, things like that. And there are multiple collective bargaining agreements across this region, each of which has its, particular little nooks and crannies that contribute to how much does a contractor end up making in profit, how much do they, are they able to pay their employees, whether it be wages, benefits, or otherwise. So I would also advocate for, for exercising some caution here and putting aside this money, especially given the fact that my understanding is the East Valley bus contractor within the past few months negotiated a collective bargaining agreement successfully, and that the existing agreement has capacity for those costs, as well as what was just spoken about, the fact that that contract has 1 year left in it. We don't want to artificially set the bar high for, Valley Metro or anyone else who may take on those services in a solicitation process in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Jesus, can I ask you a question then? Because you brought up a really good point. So under the circumstance, because Jim's saying that right now they're having a hard time filling positions. So that obviously could impact services. And I agree with everything you just said about the timing. And if there's already something in place with the contract, what would you propose? I guess the $7 million set aside one way or another, if the point is, if there's going to have to be an adjustment, whether it's a mid-year adjustment or whatever, it comes from somewhere, right? It comes from a contingency or whatever you want to call it. I think calling it contingency just puts a big bright spot on it. But Jesus, what's your thoughts about what would be a better approach to this?
Thank you for the question. I wouldn't say necessarily what I'm proposing is better, just an alternative. What we have done here, at least with our operations, which I believe are approximately one of our larger contract is about the same size as the East Valley contract, is we use any savings realized from the contract, whether it be salary savings or missed service savings. And what I mean by that is we budget, just like Valley Metro does, is my understanding, according to the maximum amount of service that can be operated, right? So the budget has to match 100% of the service miles times cost per mile, maximum schedule equals that's your budget for the year. But we also recognize that 100% of service is never operated. Even in the best of times, I think us and Valley Metro have seen somewhere between, maybe half of 1%, maybe a little under 1% of missed service. That always happens, even in the best of times. And what we've done in the past is, use that savings for other things that may pop up. We have, in the past had to address, a strike or two across the region. Phoenix has had, a few, and Valley Metro's had a few over the years. So without adding money to our budget, we've been able to use that missed service savings. Again, that's not a better solution. That's just one. I'm just trying to exercise caution and put
Sure.
aside.
So Jim, I guess what I'm hearing Jesus say that there's an assumption that you went into a budget this year. What you didn't, I hope you didn't assume a pandemic, but whatever you had. So there's a budget amount. So there's an assumption that there's going to be some savings as a result of. Is that correct?
It is, and thank you, Jesus, for raising that point. This point was raised several weeks ago, and it was a great question because if we had confidence that we could simply address any need for changes in the contract through kind of underrun, then that would simplify this whole process, and we would love that.
Just start with the first question, though. I hear what you're saying. I get it, but the question is, you've set aside a certain amount with an assumption you're going to have to negotiate up. But I hear what Phoenix has said this a couple of times. Yes, but first use the savings from the current operation. I'm assuming that's somehow you take that first. However, I don't know how savings falls out for you all, but you're going to use that first.
Yes.
That doesn't solve, just because you have more money to spend on the contract doesn't necessarily mean that the services are going to, more people are still often going to still show up for the job. They're showing up because of a wage or something else.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And sort of in response to to Phoenix's question, we did dig into that issue, and you'll see in just a minute. In fact, I'm going to use this to jump to our next slide because it's one of the things we'll talk about. I apologize for this being a little bit of an eye chart, but at in the top item in the middle column there is this operations contingency. And you'll see we have the impact, the changes that we're proposing for the RPTA budget, which is 0, and the changes that we're proposing for the VMR budget, which is a reduction of 500,000. And so in response to Phoenix's question, we looked at what do we think is our likely underrun in FY23, and can some of that be used to buy down the cost of the contingency? And on the Valley Metro Rail side, as we've shared with you in previous presentations, we've got a 40% vacancy in some of our positions, some of our in-house maintenance positions. And so, yes, thank you to you and your board members. We implemented a COLA at the beginning of May, and so we're also making targeted changes in starting wages, and we've gone to a 410 schedule and a bunch of other things. And so we're really, really hoping that those changes will help us fill those positions, but it isn't going to happen overnight.
Okay.
It probably aren't going to all be filled on July 1. So we looked at what do we think is the realistic vacancy savings associated with those in the first quarter of the year. We then subtracted out how much overtime do we think we're going to have to spend in order to fill shifts. And at the end of that, we thought, yeah, there's probably $500,000 in vacancy that we can use to buy down the cost of the contingency. And so you see that reflected there. Now, on the RPTA side, the situation isn't as straightforward because, as you know, that's virtually all contracted out. The big dog there is the East Valley Bus Contractor. So that contractor is missing about 10% of trips right now. And that's resulting in about a 3% underrun as compared to sort of fully expending all the funds that we normally would. Now, I'm setting aside in that description some COVID relief money that Phoenix brought to the table to reduce the bus costs on their side that we fund for the region. So if you actually looked at our budget versus actually, you'd see a much larger number in savings, but that's because Phoenix has reduced its billings to us because they had 17 million in extra COVID relief. So setting that aside, you got about a 3% underrun. That 3% underrun is a result of about 10% missed trips. They're running about an 18% vacancy rate right now. So then the question that we had to ask ourselves was, do we think it's realistic that that vendor could reduce its vacancy rate by 8 to 10% in the next 4 months? And I think that's pretty possible. And so as a result,
You really do?
Well,
I would be, because if some department, right now, just the ability to hire people, and then after you hire them, that they actually show up. It's kind of this phenomenon that we're struggling with. So
right.
I guess that's a great question, is like, by making all these adjustments and knowing that we're going into a process to evaluate that contract, right? And trying to understand what the East Valley maintenance contract is going to look like, who's going to participate, are we going to reset the level of service or whatever? Is the timing of that along with what you're trying to, solve, I guess it seems like they're almost kind of like bumping into each other a little bit. I mean, do you really think you have enough time to take some action here to improve enough services even before you start going out to, reassess or do a new RFP for those services?
Yeah, I think the answer to the timing question, I believe, is yes, and that's
Okay.
something we should get into in more detail, maybe in our August meeting.
Yeah, that'd be good.
But I think coming back to the larger point that you're making and that Jesus raised is, so whether or not the vendor could close a 6, 7, 8, 9% gap in its vacancy rate to reduce its vacancy from its 18 to 20% now down to a more normal.
Jim, give
10
me
or
numbers,
15%.
not percentages. What is that? It's bodies. What does that mean?
Oh, gosh.
Maybe it's 10 or is it 50? What is it?
No, it's
100.
100, yeah.
Yeah, good luck.
So,
I
but
mean,
what
I'm
are,
just saying, reality, I mean, that's a huge number today. You'll find 100 bodies that are going to show up to work. I mean, it's just, I
So-
appreciate your optimism.
yeah,
That's good.
so, but I think the larger point is whether that's achievable or not, kind of comes back to an earlier point Jesus raised, is we can either give the board flexibility for any changes by setting some money aside
Sure.
at this point, or we could say, no, let's not do that, and let's just reassess it when you come back to the board. And so essentially by saying, probably there'll be some more vacancy savings there. So instead of setting money aside, let's just address this when it comes back. Essentially what you're doing is shifting the risk of that change onto the cities by saying, we can't tell you how much you should set aside in your budgets. We reserve the right to surprise you 3 months from now.
That's
And so
fair.
we thought that was probably not the best approach.
Hopefully you're giving us the worst case scenario.
Yeah, exactly. We hope so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so having talked about that first issue, let me walk through these other revisions in the proposals that we're making. As I mentioned a minute ago, 9 of them, we've already talked about one. Total cost reduction for both agencies, $2.8 million. I'm going to start back over on the left so I don't lose track of where I was. You see the ADA paratransit and ride choices being reduced by $1.2 million. That's simply a result of negotiations with your cities on what they think the ridership will be in the upcoming year. Right. And so reducing paratransit ridership somewhat to be a little less optimistic about the return to ridership post-pandemic. Moving back into the middle column of things that are both RPTA and VMR, underneath operations contingency, you see employee benefit premiums being reduced by a total of about $700,000 for both agencies. So when we initially put the budget together, Cigna had come back to us and said, hey, we want a 16% increase in your employee benefit rates. We did a competitive bidding process, got another healthcare provider who said, we really want your business and we're willing to take a loss this year to get you. We went to Cigna and said, if you can't match United's offer, we're changing. Cigna said, all right, we'll match the offer. So there's no longer a need to increase that budget because it's the current offer is covered in our current budget. Next, you see the value of transit marketing communications being reduced by $50,000. That's fully eliminated from the budget. So the point of this request was to take the value of transit information that Jessica shared in the website and to begin really drawing the public's attention to that material to help even those who don't use transit on a regular basis understand why transit's important, why they should continue to support it. So we still think that messaging is very important. However, as you've seen, we've got the basic material available. Clearly, as in the run-up to Prop 400 extension, there are going to be other outside groups that are wanting to make those same cases. So our thought was our $50,000 is probably a drop in that bucket, and that we can make that information available to others to carry that message for us. Below that, you see driver pedestrian safety promotion coming down by $50,000. So this is marketing to try to reduce the number of cars we have running into light rail vehicles, et cetera. We still think that's important safety messaging, but we felt it could take a haircut as part of these discussions and based on the feedback we've received. Beneath that, you have recruiting costs going down by $30,000. So this was a $140,000 total issue. So this takes it down to $110,000. The things that were incorporated here were, we know we're going to have to do more advertising. We know we're going to have to do more job fairs to fill the positions that we're talking about. We know that we have a CFO, a CPO, a CAO, and a chief counsel that all have to get filled in the next year. So there's going to be cost associated with recruiting for those, potentially with travel for candidates and relocation costs, et cetera. But we thought that we could give that a bit of a haircut, and if it runs short, we'll have a bake sale. The last item on their agency allocation changes you'll see is just moving money from one category to another. We had a number of questions from one agency rather to another, number of questions from your staff about, well, how come the cost split on this particular position that serves both RPTA and VMR is this, not that? And in the process of answering those questions, we came to the conclusion that, okay, yeah, you're right. Actually, we had probably slightly underallocated RPTA and overallocated VMR in some cases. So this is just correcting for those based upon those discussions. Moving over into the last column, VMR only, insurance contingency is coming down by $180,000. That's about a $2 million total issue. So the point here is, you may recall, our longtime insurance provider decided it was not going to insure public transit anymore. And the new provider increased our rates 46% last year. So we've talked to our insurance broker and said, hey, what do you think we're going to see in this year's rate renewal? And he said, well, you're adding all these new light rail vehicles for Tempe streetcar. You're adding all these new light rail vehicles for, South Central Extension and, Northwest Phase 2, et cetera. So I think you're going to see an increase. And then how much was that increase going to be? On the very lowest of the low end, 15%. On the highest of the high end, 25%. Our initial budget went with the high number, and to err on the side of caution at 25%. In further conversation with the broker, we think we could do 20%. And as a result, that reduces the amount we're setting aside for insurance rate increases by $180,000. And then lastly, non-revenue fleet. This reflects pulling 2 out of the 3 vehicles in this item out of the operating budget and moving them into the capital budget. So those 2 items were, 1, a vehicle for the supervisor for the Tempe streetcar, and 2, a vehicle to be doing shift change for Tempe streetcar vehicles, since they're not coming back through the OMC for shift change purposes. So we initially had those in the operating budget. There's some room in the Tempe streetcar capital budget, so we're moving them into the capital budget, so they're not being funded here. That reduces the cost of that item by $107,000. So those 8 items combined will reduce our total ask by $2.8 million. On the RPTA side, that looks like this. These are all the items that have been requested. The items in red are the ones that are changing. And so just at the highest level, if we set aside the things in the green category, that's inflationary. The things in the blue category, that's continuing equipment, continuing commitments. And the 2 items at the top of the recommendations, which are the operations contingency we've already talked about, and the labor market, the COLA that we dealt with last week, or last month rather, then the total discretionary ask that you see in this budget for RPTA is $896,000. When you consider that we started the RPTA budget with a $2.7 million reduction, were it not for all the inflation that we're dealing with, the RPTA budget would actually be going down by $1.8 million or 1.1%. So the point that's being made here is this budget is entirely driven by the inflationary issues that are out of our control. If it weren't for those issues, we'd be coming to you for a cut, but we're not, because inflation's a reality and we're having to deal with it. Okay, now, how does that impact the RPTA budget as a whole? So this executive summary chart, again, bit of an eye test, I apologize, but on the top, it shows the total change from FY22 to FY23, and it breaks it out by the 3 categories we've discussed: inflation, continuing commitments, and then discretionary changes. The middle tier shows how that impacts city funding, and then the bottom tier is basically everything else, right? PTF, federal dollars, et cetera. And so incorporating the changes that we just talked about would result in a total RPTA budget of, there we go, $191.9 million, which is a $24.9 million increase year over year. Of that increase, $10.8 million is being funded by cities, and the balance by fares, federal dollars, PTF, et cetera. So in connecting that number to the budget table that's in the memo for adoption, our accounting system looks more like this, where you have the divisions broken out on the left and the amounts funded in the columns. And so you see there is that $191.9 million. So this is the table that's attached to the memo for budget, for adoption of the budget. And I just wanted to make sure it was clear that these are, in fact, the same numbers, simply displayed here to show the change and the cause of the change, and here to align with our accounting system. Okay, and then on the flip side, we have the capital budget. Oh, I'm going the wrong direction. Oh, okay. All right, next, this same table, I mentioned a minute ago that we've got a total of $50 million in city funds, which is an increase of 10.8 million over the prior year. And if we compare that to the sources and uses table that's in the budget, in the memo for the budget, there's that $50 million, right? So again, just simply making clear that the format that we thought was most useful for board decision-making is being translated faithfully into what's requested for adoption in the memo. And then the capital budget. Moving on to VMR. I seem to be missing a VMR slide here. I apologize. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's not the case. Moving on to VMR. So here's the list of total issues requested for VMR. Again, the ones in red are the changes that we've just talked about. Once again, the top few in the recommendations category, insurance, contract contingency, and labor are really inflation by a different name. Setting all of those aside, you'd be seeing a $2.6 million change year over year in this budget were it not for inflation. We started out with about a $500,000 total reduction. So were it not for inflation and continuing commitments, VMR would be going up by 2.7%, which again, I think is a fairly conservative number, given that we're an aging system and maintenance costs are simply naturally going to rise from here through the system's life cycle. Reflecting those same changes in this executive summary level, you see a total, there we go, a total VMR budget of 97.7 million. That's an increase of 17.7 million year over year. And that is reflected here, $97.7 million in the table attached to the budget memo. Going back to funding, you have a total city contribution to VMR of $44.2 million, which is actually a decrease of $500,000 over the prior year. Just noting again, that's because we have COVID relief money left in this budget, which will go away next year, and we're going to see that snap back to a more normal city contribution level. And that $44 million is reflected in the sources and uses attached to your memo here, $44.1 million. So I think with that, I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you, Jim. Any questions from members of the board? Anybody? You made a statement and then I saw two different numbers that I just was curious about. I guess one of the biggest challenges I suspect Jessica has for the coming year, right, is to go find the positions, find the individuals to fill those critical positions. Is that right, Jessica? Does that be fair?
Absolutely,
So,
yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I know it's a minor number, but I just think it sends the wrong message when you are reducing the recruiting category. I mean, unless I'm missing something, I think to me, if nothing else, the request should be, well, how do we put money in this budget to make sure we're covering that? But I'm assuming you're getting some savings from those positions not being filled. So you move that money around to help you fill those. But I just want to make sure we're not going to cut ourselves short to do the advertising, the headhunter, the recruiting. And I know it wasn't a lot, but that's just.
Yep.
That's right,
we
Chair
absolutely
Brady.
can.
So we have the vacancies, both with those specific positions that are not currently filled or will soon be vacant. And then we have other vacancies we can pull from as well. It is not our intention to reduce our recruiting efforts, but rather to offset them from other sources. In fact, last month, our board authorized us to release a request for qualifications for executive recruiting firms. And we will come back to the board next month in June to request approval of contracts with a recruiting firm or firms to help us fill those positions. So it is one of our greatest tasks in the coming year to rebuild the Valley Metro team, and that includes several critical positions that are part of the leadership team. And we will do so with purpose and a forward-looking vision.
Okay, thank you. I just saw that when you were reducing it, it just seemed kind of contrary to the messaging. So if I were doing it, I wouldn't have included that, but since you did, you probably can't take it back. So there you go. Okay, that is where we are.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that was just for information. We'll now move to item 5, travel expenditures and solicitations. I think that information is provided for information. Does anybody have any questions? Item 6, report on current events and suggested future agenda items. Is there any suggestions from members of the committee? If not, just information, the next meeting will be Wednesday, August 3rd, 2022 at 11 a.m. All right, that concludes our joint meeting. Give me a chance here to flip over. All right. We are now we'll be convening the Transit Management Committee meeting. Welcome everybody to the meeting. Again, the public will be provided with an opportunity at this time to address the committee on non-agenda items and all action agenda items. Up to 3 minutes will be provided per speaker, unless the chair allows more at his discretion. A total of 15 minutes for all speakers will be provided. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
Mr. Crowley.
Mr. Crowley, please come forward.
It's unfortunate that your state member is not on the dais or on the phone, et cetera. For when it comes to the rural routes, it was the state who stopped the funding for the Wickenburg route. Remember, $100,000 is what it was costing, and the city of Phoenix didn't feel that they wanted the system to cover it, and that rural route was eliminated. It needs to get back, and it needs to be done in the right way, as in you start the route in Wickenburg early in the morning and connect it to the surprise park and ride. And that way we have an intermodal system, and then have it finish up there in Wickenburg. But that's not the way it was done, and now it doesn't exist. I'm looking at all of the minutes from last one, and all of those situations still are occurring. And I understand that the chairman doesn't feel that staff should do their job, especially when instructed to do so. But I'm still waiting on some of the documentation. But one of the things on the documentation that I've already received was that the PTF funds last year were 140 million. And the thing that I've been asking for is, show me where you spent it. And when I'm looking at your document today and going through that budget, and I see that it doesn't say 140 PTF funds. It says 52, then 83. Why the double shuffle? And then when I look further into it, and it's going through the public pass-through, there's a funding mechanism there, and that's Public Transportation Funds Program. And it amounts to, what would it be, 98 million? And I then look at it and it says we've got reserves for them of 37. And then when you look at the next page, when it comes up, it says they've got 18 in future. How did the rail, with its $2 billion of expenditures, have 36 million in reserves? And then I go back again to what you're supposed to have been doing, and you'll notice in your minutes when you go to agree to them about how I pointed out to you in 18, Bell Road was supposed to get that upgrade from the 303 to Frank Lloyd Wright. And when I've got the document from you guys from November of last year saying, well, we only eliminated 2 of the super grid. Well, where are they? Where are those routes? Why aren't you spending the money that you're supposed to on the bus, and stop thinking that rail is the answer to all of it? And unless the rail is connected to the bus, It's not multimodal. When you built the one out to Mesa, 16th Street still doesn't have one. How come? Because you didn't build it right to begin with. Don't make the same mistake on the extensions.
All right, we're ready for item number 2, consent agenda. The consent agenda is presented for action. There are 2 items on there. Are there any questions from members of the board or that want to pull this item for separate discussion? If not, I request a motion for approval. Have a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and second from Kevin and Ryan. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. Anyone oppose? Very good. All right. Uh-oh, here comes Jim again. No. Now we actually have to do this for real, right? That was the dress rehearsal. Do you have any final words or have you used all your final words? Okay. So sometimes the more you say, the less likely people are gonna, start turning on me here in a second. Okay, we have item 3. Now this is for transit, RPTA, to approve recommending the Valley Metro fiscal year 23 proposed operating and capital budget and a 5-year operating forecast and capital program 23 through 27. Are there any questions on this item? This item will be considered for action at this time. Okay, if not, I'll request a motion for approval of this item, item number 3.
So moved.
I have a motion for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
Oh, you guys are good. Okay, I have a motion, second from Kevin and Ryan. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Very good. Thank you. Item is approved. We're now ready for move to item number 4, report on current events and suggested future agenda items. I think I covered my request for a future agenda item in August. I just want to make sure that is a formal request at this time, that we have that discussion as early as possible about bus maintenance. Okay, thank you. Item number 5, next meeting is Wednesday, August 3rd at 11 a.m. August 3rd, 2022 at 11 a.m. Thank you. All right, we are now moving on to Rail Management Committee meeting. Thank you all for joining us, those who are here for transit. We are now convening the meeting and welcome members to the June Rail Management Committee meeting. We're now ready for item 1, public comment. Again, the public will be provided with an opportunity at this time to address the committee on non-agenda items and all action agenda items. Up to 3 minutes will be provided per speaker unless the chair allows for more. This time, at a total of 15 minutes for all speakers will be provided. Pat, do we have a public comment card?
Mr. Crowley.
Mr. Crowley, please come forward.
How you doing?
Good.
It's got operating and capital budget. How come you guys are discussing the operating costs of the rail when you have nothing to do with it? It's each of the member cities. So when I see it as expressed this way, I'm going, well, what is it here? And as I've stated at the other 2 meetings, I enjoy that you have your status of top among equals and that anything you do is for you and about you. When I look at the new routing going out to 79th Avenue, 12th Street is where you're going to have one of the stops. You're not going to have one on 7th, you're not going to have one on 15th, but you're going to have one at 12th Street. How is that intermodal? Being that it's 3/8 of a mile from the 15th Avenue bus and 5 blocks away from the 7th. How is that being multimodal? How is that designing it right? Now, you just passed $30 million for people to design and work on it, of which it said that 212,000 was done for the bus. Well, you got what you paid for because they're not doing it intermodal. And rail, when you are putting these contracts out, are you saying design it for us? Or are you saying design it for multimodal, that it has connectivity? When you built the station at Roosevelt, it was supposed to connect to a bus facility in the middle of the deck park. What happened with that? Well, if it was for the bus, why do it? But if it's for the rail, we got to make sure it happens. So why aren't you being multimodal? What do you have against cleaning the air and making it a fast, safe, and effective system? And when it comes to safety, their health and safety is the major thing that I'm looking at. And when you have the distance between stops, what can I say? Also, all of your little drinking fountains there on the light rail stops. Have you got any that are covered so that when somebody does go to use it, they don't burn their face, hands, etc.? I don't think you do, but why would you? Because that's for your clientele. It isn't something that makes the rail. Please start considering your customers. Start doing it multimodal. That means build it right the first time. So could you get that one going out to 79th and figure it out better? And also, how about 16th Street going to Mesa? There's a reason that that doesn't have a stop.
Mr. Crowley, your time is up.
I was walking away, Pat, sorry.
All right, we'll now move to the consent agenda. It's presented for action. Are there any questions on the two items on the consent agenda? If not, I'll request a motion for approval of the consent agenda. Come on, Ryan and Eric.
Yeah, motion to approve.
I have a motion for approval from Eric and I have a second from Ryan. Thank you very much. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Includes you, Jesus. There you go. Thank you. All right, that motion is approved. We're now moving to the approval of the fiscal year 2023 Valley Metro VMR operating and capital budget and 5-year operating and capital forecast. I'm not going to let Jim come up, so I need a motion. Hey, sis, you need to get on the record here. Would you like a motion for approval? Would you like to make that motion?
Which item, sir? 3?
3.
I move approval, sir.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Eric?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Awesome. Now, item 4, report on current events and suggested future agenda items. Anybody? No, next meeting again will be Wednesday, August 3rd, 2022. Thank you all very much. We are adjourned.
Thank you.